So you're not allowed to make fun of anybody, ever. It makes me furious. Oh, yeah, you know, oh.
Bolsonaro.
How can you say that?
What are you talking? What are you complaining about?
Patrice Lumumba comes back to Leopoldville a prisoner. The former Congo premier, who was captured when he fled inland, no longer wears the tuft of whiskers on his chin that helped to identify him. His arrest provoked several clashes between Lumumba followers and Congolese army troops. But Congo's strongman, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, shown as he watches Lumumba arrive, says he is prepared to put down any uprising. At the same time, the Soviet Union has been demanding Lumumba's release and immediate talks at the United Nations. Mobutu enjoys the sight of Lumumba being tied up more firmly for transfer to the garrison town of Teesville. A soldier tries to stuff into Lumumba's mouth a crumpled speech asserting his claim to power. The former premier shows no emotion. It may be the end of a chapter, but not yet the end of the Congo story.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
What's up?
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere in the ever-expanding, ever-aggressive TMBS universe. On this week's program, the great Anna Kasparian. She is a host and executive producer at the Young Turks. We're talking about why AOC is crushing it, how to engage democracy and increase the top marginal tax rate for the wealthy. Talk a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard and the ideas man himself, Dave Rubin. Interesting ideas. Apparently, he wasn't reading up about the clear-cutting of the Amazon because there was an emergency that took place on a television cartoon that I didn't know was still running. We'll get to that. Plus, we honor and talk about the legacy of Patrice Lumumba, assassinated murdered by the Belgians, the CIA, who installed a dictator that you saw there in that cold open who ruled the now Democratic Republic of Congo, Zaire, under him until 1997. Plus, we have a global update. We're checking in on what's happening in Yemen. New footage of Tulsi Gabbard talking about torture. Turkey's political prisoners. We're talking about the Kurdish leaders that could have a roadmap for the Middle East, but have been jailed by Erdogan, a piece Gene Bajlan and I wrote for the Jacobin. In the post-game, we have a lot of sound, including some throwbacks. Hugo Chavez as coup forces mount in Venezuela. Bernie Sanders schooling Alan Greenspan. And Rand Paul is going to Canada for healthcare. And there will be an addition in the postgame of Roots, Rand Paul. And of course, Brexit, the massive defeat of Theresa May. Does this mean a massive victory for people? Will Jeremy Corbyn become the next UK PM? And how does the peace deal in Northern Ireland hold? All that and if you can believe it, much, much more on the Michael Brooks Show, both main and post-game. Welcome new patrons. But first, let's talk about what this government shutdown actually means. Sometimes cliches are true, and when politicians and writers and journalists and activists say, look, this ridiculous, demented game that this ridiculous, demented president is playing has real human consequences, that's the truth. That's the profound truth, and those human consequences are only going to increase. And we need to get to a deeper understanding, not only of the human consequences of this shutdown, but also the broader story that this fits into in terms of trust in federal government, what government is, and also specifically programs for the poor and how we think about poverty. I grew up in a way where these programs, these issues affected me personally. There's times growing up where there's no doubt that I would not have been able to eat if there were not things like SNAP benefits. Houses wouldn't be heated. Rent wouldn't be procured. This is life or death stuff, and I could speak to this even myself on a personal level. So let's look at what has happened so far. 380,000 have been furloughed, and 420,000 are working without pay. There's 800,000 federal workers without pay total. The shutdown has gone on for 25 days. And of course, as we know, Trump is holding the country hostage to pay for a ludicrous, nonsensical, fantasy-based, and of course, fundamentally not only delusional, but of course, xenophobic, conspiratorial border wall nonsense, none of which should be indulged rhetorically by Democrats as they make their own sort of noises about border security. What we need is, in fact, a demilitarized border. The USDA, the Commerce Department, Department of the Interior, Department of Transportation, State Department, Justice Department, Homeland Security, U.S. Treasury, HUD, and HUD are affected. The Department of Defense most certainly is not. The Coast Guard is funded under the Department of Homeland Security, so they are going without pay. And it hits, of course, as everything does, the most vulnerable the hardest. Native American tribes are suffering radically under the shutdown. Treaty obligations require the U.S. government to provide many services in tribal areas. With the shutdown, food programs that 90,000 American Indians rely on are under threat, as well as, of course, healthcare services. 1.9 million are reliant on the Interior Department of Indian Affairs for basic services, which they are not receiving. In vast rural areas, people of all backgrounds, including, of course, those living on reservations, are snowed in, unable to leave their home because federal funds for road clearing are not being distributed. Low-wage workers are threatened. Contract workers could potentially lose health care. Food benefits, food SNAP benefits, which I just talked about in my own life, are under threat. The SNAP program reaches 42 million Americans. That is 13% of the population. Housing vouchers affect 2 million people under threat in HUD. The USDA helps provide support for rural Americans with rent, repair, and buy homes. And this also is jeopardized because of the shutdown. The EPA is shut down, as well as food inspections. This is affecting everything from the safety of the food on your plate to, of course, the monitoring of the ecology of the country. And, of course, it's really important here because in many respects, this already profoundly pared down government we have, this one run on austerity, this run where everything is subordinated to government logic, Republicans even want to destroy the last minor remnants of. And all too many neoliberals and Democrats want to privatize and create complicated, convoluted public-private schemes. But this is what this actually looks like in terms of actual practice. And at the same time, people dealing with the federal government have to navigate vast bureaucracies and vast mazes, many of which, particularly when they're dealing with poor people, are intentionally designed to make it maximally hard to access essential benefits. Trump's more than happy to hold working and vulnerable people, as certainly Mitch McConnell is as well, to hold working and vulnerable people hostage for his border wall. Attacking vulnerable people is the point. But where this liberal analysis ends, a radical one begins. Trump and the state did not just attack the vulnerable because they are mean, but because this is a process central to the exploitation of many. And this is where a really important book that is in some respects slightly dated, but the broader argument holds, called Regulating the Poor, by an incredibly important scholar by the name, the lead author is Frances Fox Piven and Richard Cloward. This book, Regulating the Poor, looked at the history of welfare programs before 1996, when the Republican Congress and Bill Clinton pushed through a vicious, cruel, and incredibly punitive, horrifying welfare change, which still harms millions of families to this day. And this is the context, by the way, that we're in. This is what Adolph Reed talks about. Adolph Reed says, in the 70s, the conversation from the radical left was, what can we do to make welfare not a means of policing and controlling the poor, but something to broadly democratize society and create more power for real people? And then he said by the time of the Reagan Revolution and then the Clinton era and moving forward, then even the radical left needed to fight on the terrain of protecting basic programs. And that is where we've been up until potentially today, with a new upsurge in at least social democratic energy. But in Regulating the Poor, they talked about how social welfare programs are not redistributive, but essentially punitive. They were designed not to alleviate poverty, but to keep workers in highly exploitative, low-wage work. So one of the ways that they talk about these sort of various ways that welfare was used to keep people from the bare minimum, right? So that they don't fall into complete disrepair and total hunger and poverty. You see this dynamic works with people that, as an example, work at Walmart or Amazon, these vastly profitable corporations where they're ruthlessly abused in their workplace, but they still rely on things like food stamps. That helps insulate the edge of the capitalist exploitation. Intrusive programs and caseworkers condition benefits as a form of social control. To secure benefits, poor people face humiliation and endless bureaucracy, and minor mistakes can cause an interruption or loss of benefits. As Piven explains, historically, rules like man in the house rule denied welfare to a mother who had a man associated with any of them, forcing one individual to accept exploitative labor conditions to support an entire family. Welfare expansion was never meant to prevent poverty, but to control social disorder. Piven and Cloward argued that welfare expansion in the U.S. was not to help those in need, but to quell disorder and political turmoil. Work enforcing arrangements are some of the most predatory forms of welfare, since they perpetuate the same systems of exploitation that plunge people into poverty in the first place, right? And so we see the three dynamics here. This is another reason, of course, why those universal programs like Medicare for All are the most effective and least bullshit. Because everybody, this is nothing special. Everybody needs healthcare. Everybody needs housing. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs clothing and shelter and so on. These things should be absolutely on the house, provided free, no question, no requirements. Welfare programs were designed to police people into the workforce as well as monitor other forms of social control. Now, of course, we don't junk these programs. The reality is, and again, I can personally attest to this, these programs in our current economic life and political reality are saving millions of lives. But we need to know the context in which they were deployed, not even as healthy, positive altruism, but in fact as means of market coercion. And that has bled post-Clinton 96 welfare into these private-public partnerships, and in fact, meager social assistance programs subsidizing some of the most ruthlessly exploited jobs in the entire totem pole. And that's, of course, the so-called service industry that we see from McDonald's to Walmart to Amazon. That's how that dynamic works. Of course, race is a major part of this. This meant that Piven and Cloward talk particularly racial groups who do the most menial work historically. Relief cooperates by reducing the amount of aid to a group or closing off the possibility of aid whatsoever. And as well as we can see today, the denying of access of welfare programs only exposes a group to further exploitation in the labor market. Fear of ICE, as an example, is a perfect example of this sort of state apparatus of terror and racialized forcing into the labor market. The government shutdowns hurts workers and migrants especially. The the potential interruption of the benefits is a part of a larger system that enforces a permanent crisis in the working class. As socialists, we cannot just defend the system of welfare that are designed to keep people in poverty, but we need to challenge the economic system itself that generates poverty. And that is the big C. That is capitalism. And that is why we need to maneuver and generate and innovate, in fact. This is a proper use of the word innovate. A post-capitalist order that delivers for the many, not the few. Guys, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, when you look at the history of a lot of these welfare programs, you see, as Piven pointed out, like how they were used to punish the poor. And it's something that's very important to understand, that when the right wing is so bent on destroying any kind of social assistance, that we don't get distracted into realizing that a lot of these welfare systems are not necessarily designed to empower people, but are very much designed to placate a very serious social problem, which is caused by low wages and exploitative work, and people who are also involved in types of work that's outside of the typical economy, under being paid under the table and things like that, where people get very much abused. And when you look at something like the government shutdown, I've been reading a lot about people. It's not just that some people might lose their benefits. It's just the thought and the inability to plan.
Emotional anxiety,
and
that's another thing. But it all affects. I mean, again, we all know the many problems with Obamacare. But one of the things that was so disgusting, I'm glad that John McCain voted the way he did. That's good for him. That's a strike in his favor. But just even the reality that he kept tens of millions of people in suspense about whether or not they would live or have health care for their children to maximize his media impact. That in and of itself is kind of an emotional terrorism. Mm-hmm. And this is, clearly played out right now if your rent, your college tuition, having food, all of it.
But think about all these people who are relying on government programs to get by. How many different organizations and bureaucracies they have to go through, right? If you get food stamps through the USDA, right? A lot of people get money for their housing, Section 8, through HUD. Right? These are different institutions, and with each of their budgets sort of in flux right now, it can be very damaging because you can't prepare for what might be an extra $400 hit next month, right? And that's something that puts you in a state of crisis, which is very, very damaging. We talk about just like middle class people not having any savings. Poor people have nothing, and they don't have support networks on top of it. So these kind of crises on the government shutdown that hits them hard and hits them the hardest by far.
That's right. And as and as Nancy Pelosi correctly mocked, Trump's like, sometimes things are tough, but you figure it out. And as she said, most people can't ask their dads. Certainly not poor people, but also plenty of middle-class people cannot ask their dads. And actually, some people who are younger in the workforce and are lucky enough to be in such a position, they might need to be turning around and thinking about their loved ones, their parents, and and so on. It's disgusting.
And what's happening in Indian country, too, is something that a lot of people haven't talked about. It's very important. I mean, so much of people who are living on reservations in Indian country are very reliant on the federal government. That was the deal that was made when they gave up huge amounts, acres and millions of acres of territory to the United States, that they would have their basic needs taken care of by the federal government. And, we're seeing food pantries going empty, and also federal tribes having to dip into their own savings, which are very meager for many of them, to have to supply the services that are given to them through treaties with the United States government that we've just continually failed to honor, and it's a real shame to see.
100%. Matt, you have anything? All right, let's go to the shoutout.
Get to the shoutout. Creepy. Shoutout. Weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible. Shoutout. This is crazy. Shoutout. This is out of control. Shoutout. That's creepy. Shoutout. That's weird. Creepy. Weird. Crazy. This is crazy. This is out of control. This is weird. Shoutout.
The genius, the sonic mastermind of the whole TMBS experience, DJ Danerky. Check him out. Danerky, set up a Patreon. In the cold open, that very upsetting, disgusting, but important cold open obviously was reflecting on Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba is probably a name you've heard. If you're a patron, you heard an illicit history with the great Milton Alamadi, where we talked about the broader Congo history, but focused, significantly on Patrice Lumumba, who's one of the most important figures of the 20th century. And his assassination will be the 58th anniversary of his assassination by a Belgian hit squad. The former colonial occupiers of the Congo will be this Thursday. This is a picture up on screen of Patrice Lumumba. And of course, the CIA also had a keen interest in assassinating him, and they installed Mobutu Sese Seko, who was a loyal U.S. client and vicious dictator from the early 60s to 1997. I would recommend watching the Rumble in the Jungle about the Ali Foreman fight, which took place in what was then the Zaire in the early 70s. Patrice Lumumba was this is one of the most important assassinations of the 20th century. Basically, this is sort of one of the premier examples, and of course, there's plenty of others. We know Guatemala, Chile, and really just countless other places of Western and U.S.-backed coups in developing countries. He was prime minister of the Congo for 7 months, and he was only 36 years old when he was murdered, when he was assassinated. During the Belgian colonization, Lumumba was forced into prison for a year by the Belgian colonial authorities on the dubious and largely discredited charges of quote-unquote embezzling funds. He helped found the Congolese national movement and wanted independence and control of Congo's natural wealth. And that's what people talk about when they talk about the second colonization, right? So a lot of these places countries started achieving kind of formal political independence in the 50s and the 60s and even into the 70s and sometimes even into the 80s, but mostly the 50s and the 60s. But then this whole other apparatus of World Bank and IMF loans, Western capital controls, and that dynamic continues today. There was just a piece in the New York Times 2 days ago about the Trump administration trying to counter China in Africa. And China is behaving in a totally predatory colonial fashion in Africa, as are we, and actually the French are still pulling their weight there as well. This is the dynamic that goes on. So it's crucial when you had a leader that not only wanted the full political independence, but also understood the broader reality of, owning one's resources. And of course, as Mossadegh in Iran could attest, that was when you really got on the U.S., British, and Western capital crosshairs. The Belgium and covertly the U.S. worked to flame up ethnic differences in the Congo. They targeted areas with mineral wealth. After independence, Lumumba was elected as the first prime minister of the Congo. He denounced decades of colonialism and the tribalism and ethnic divisions that the West stoked to divide Africans. Bear that in mind when you see a lot of coverage in a place like Congo. A lot of these conflicts and a lot of these problems of identity were in fact, sometimes organic to a place, but always flamed and furthered by colonial occupiers as part of divide and conquer politics. He aimed to work with the Belgians and the United States, but there was immediate resistance. He then lurked to build an alliance of the UN, but the U.S. worked against this. When these options were exhausted, that was when he sought relations with the Soviet Union. This gave the Americans and the Belgians the opportunity to call him a communist, and the CIA attempted to assassinate Lumumba but was unsuccessful. Working with the soon-to-be military dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, Belgian operatives and covert American forces captured Lumumba and murdered him. As a symbol, Lumumba hope that was the hope that was long denied by the long arm of colonialism. And let me just quote Lumumba to finish this shout out. The colonialists are nothing for Africa for her own sake. They are attracted by African riches, and their actions are guided by a desire to preserve their interests in Africa against the wishes of the African people. For the colonialists, all their means are good if they help them to possess these riches. And that was a speech given at the All Africa Conference in Leopold in August 1960. A lot of people say they're interested in ideas. And I would suggest that a reading of Patrice Lumumba and the history, by the way, read King Leopold's Ghost. which is an essential book for understanding not only the Belgian-Congo relationship, but really the broader dynamics of imperialism, colonialism, and of course Patrice Lumumba in his thinking and his advocacy are essential for understanding our world and an assassinated hero of the 20th century. So, R.I.P. to the great Patrice Lumumba. And I have to say, I'm always remembered. This is very petty of me, but it feels actually slightly important. I remember somebody saying, I remember a peak resistance tweet, and I won't dig it up, whatever. I'm not interested in that kind of, I'm no interest in calling out or beefing or whatever. I don't even think it was a particularly well-known person. But it was with regards to Trump and this whole thing. And they basically, it was in the early administration when it seemed clear that some people in the intelligence community were definitely leaking things to humiliate Trump, right? We can have a conversation about, there's different perspectives on that. I'm kind of agnostic, to be honest, about whether or not you take what you can get to undermine the fucker, or it's just such a fundamentally, innately dangerous thing, no matter who it's targeted at. You can't encourage it. It's a valid debate. But this person said the CIA showed that when you go after them, you best not miss. And I mean, I don't know how much history you need to know of what the CIA has been in the world to this day. I don't even want to describe it polemically. I mean, it's a profound insult to history, and it's a profound insult to current reality, and it's a profound insult to almost every quarter of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, and the Caribbean, and it distorts today. I have no defense. Substantively, I can't. I think the current government of Maduro in Venezuela, I have a really hard time defending, to be honest. I know some people will squeal, and then other people are going to squeal with what I'm about to follow up next, which is to say a coup in Venezuela is a crime against the world. And whatever would replace Maduro, I have no doubt, would have all of the same problems and none of the small benefits. And there is no difference between what these fucking thugs, Trump and Pompeo, want and what anybody who's on TV going, "Oh, how dare you, Mr. Trump." There's no how dare you talk about removing a government in Latin America. There's no how dare you about that. There's no how dare you about drones pummeling civilians across the globe at a higher rate than under Obama, operated in concert with the White House and the intelligence and military apparatus. So we need to be real about this stuff, and a lot more fucking rigorous. All right, we got to talk about Brexit, and let's start by talking about Brexit by getting in the mood. There's a big news that happened today, but I think actually this is a good visual cue as to what happened today. This is Theresa May from a couple of months ago. Indeed. Today, Theresa May's Brexit deal faced a stunning and historic defeat in the British House of Commons. MPs voted by 432 votes to 202 to reject the deal. That is stunning.
Ouch.
Actually. The defeat is a huge, I'm quoting now from the BBC, the defeat is a huge blow for Miss May, who spent more than 2 years hammering out a deal with the EU. The plan was aimed to bring about an orderly departure from the EU on the 29th of March and setting up a 20-month transition period to negotiate a free trade deal. The UK is still on course to leave on March 29th, but the defeat throws the manner of that departure and timing into further doubt. So, look, as we've said, there's a left and socialist critique of the EU, which is totally valid with regards to monetary policy and austerity. It's 100% right. I think the answer is the Yanis Varoufakis answer, which is that you socialize and democratize the EU, because there's other things that we like about the EU, or at least used to like about the EU, like freedom of movement, like shared environmental policies, and so on. So the answer is democratize. Now, the British happen to have the best of both worlds under the old system. They were not part of the euro, so they could set their own monetary policy and were not harmed by EU rulemaking in that regard. But they also had open movement, which is one of the main reasons that they were able to achieve a peace deal in Northern Ireland, because essentially there's no real border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which was a major condition of the Catholic side wanting to join Ireland or have full independence. That open border helped sort of circle that square, and that's actually still one of the main sticking points in Brexit exit and a main crisis point. So the EU the British vote on Brexit was definitely a cell phone. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, I think, has been right to not, though, rush to put his political energy into a second referendum, because his energy should be going into government. And there's also no doubt that this is a real crisis, and it's a potential serious future crisis, but also the crisis that has been pummeling the UK since the financial crisis, and particularly since David Cameron took power, has been vicious and sustained austerity, which has massively increased poverty and social disruption, as well as, of course, the corresponding rises in and resurgence of racism and xenophobia in the UK. Here's Jeremy Corbyn, who is calling tomorrow for a vote of no confidence in Miss May that could lead us to elections. Here he was talking about what he will do in government.
The crucial thing, Andrew, is Tuesday, and then if this government can't control Parliament, it's time to move on and have a general election so the people can decide who they want to be their government.
You become Prime Minister in a couple of months' time. What's the first thing you do?
Well, there's many first things to do, but one of them would obviously be to set up an immediate process of negotiation with the EU around the customs union, market access and protection of rights and privileges. But parallel with that would be a rapid programme on housing, on investment, on health, on social security, on education. Please understand the anger of so many people in this country at the way they feel the political elite and establishment has let them down and ignored their communities. It's Labour that will speak for them.
That's exactly right. So they need to have an election. They need to elect a for real Labour government that will stop austerity, that will work to preserve the NHS. And also, though, let's be clear, too. This is disastrous, of course, from an economic point of view. And most of the business community in the UK oppose Brexit. But there's plenty of appetite, an overlap between the xenophobic far right, which wanted Brexit and was the engine of Brexit, and the business class in the UK. Because frankly, what will this end up looking like if there is a Brexit and you continue with right-wing governments? Well, it's going to mean you slash and gut great British achievements like the NHS. And it's going to mean that the UK becomes, even more than it already was, essentially an island hub of capital. But without these fresh cash infusions of sort of like horizon markets that are more strategically located for the future, like Singapore or Dubai. So you're actually going to get the worst of both worlds. So the number one priority in the UK is elect Labour and Jeremy Corbyn into government, to stop austerity immediately, to immediately begin reclaiming and reseizing wealth from the capital class in the UK, introducing those amazing ideas on economic democracy that Labour has put forward. And then there needs to be a strategy for the EU. And I think it would be very interesting if Jeremy Corbyn, who I know is close with Yanis Varoufakis, attempted to actually align those forces in terms of his renegotiation with a broader fight to democratize the European Union. I think that would be the most interesting move. Now, Theresa May is not, I mean, everybody knows that she's a disastrous prime minister, and everybody knows she's right-wing, and everybody knows that she, along with the United States, has supported the Emirati and Saudi mass murder in Yemen, right? But there's also some sense, because we're going to end this segment by playing another clip of her dancing. And some people, and even me at times, have been like, Jesus Christ. That's what, honestly, one of the reasons, I mean, We don't talk about or make fun of Theresa May that much. And she is one of the worst political leaders in the world. And frankly, she provides a lot of material. But I actually thought this clip of this BBC Question Time show, I don't know this woman's name. She's an audience member. I'm going to very confidently assume she was more robust and articulate than anybody on the panel.
She should be in Parliament.
She should absolutely be in Parliament. This actual explanation of why not to feel sorry about Theresa May, and by the way, just stipulate, look, feel compassion and empathy for whoever the hell you want to feel compassion and empathy for. I'm of the school that the goal might be to feel compassion and empathy for everybody. But the frame of, oh, well, ignore this xenophobia and austerity because, she's having a rough time of it, ridiculous frame, and it's put to bed by this brilliant audience member. Let's check this out.
Two things. Firstly, could we get over feeling sorry for Theresa May?
Do you never feel sorry for her?
It's not...
Hang on. Do you never feel sorry for her?
No, I don't feel sorry for her. She's the woman who, for many, many years, has led the hostile environment for migrants in this country, which resulted in the Windrush generation. It's a disgrace. She's the person who created her very specific red lines on immigration in the ECJ, which have created the negotiation mess that we're in. She triggered Article 50 when she had no plan. And as to criticising the EU on this, there are 27 other countries in the EU. They have been completely united on this. We do not even have a cabinet that can unite, and definitely a government that isn't in control of the process. They are a body of rules and regulations, and they are not going to break that when it's the most successful single market in the world, and all around the world people want to do deals with the EU. We are going to lose all of that, and it is ridiculous for us, with our hopeless government who cannot get it together to actually work out what the will of the people is today in 2019, to blame the EU and to go around feeling sorry for Theresa May. I'm sorry.
Go off, Queen. Elect her to Parliament. And please look up Windrush generation. This is one of the most racist, most vile policies on the planet. It's very similar to stripping, immigration status for people here in the United States. You were under like DACA as an example, but these are also, including some people from, Jamaica and Trinidad as an example, who lived in the United Kingdom since like literally the 1960s and even earlier, who were, of course, brought in because of a need. And now the Tories see an opportunity for some great race baiting and distraction from their own horrific policies and playing to the fascist forces of UKIP and BNP. Theresa May has been a strong supporter of those policies, and it is absolutely disgusting. So that is to say, let's play out this segment with Theresa May dancing in Africa. Jesus Christ. Whew. Oh man, if you're listening, I would definitely recommend getting on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel.
It's
because
not the
words
worst.
cannot describe.
It's not the worst thing a British Prime Minister has done on that continent, but
it is the most embarrassing. I was meeting my new friend Jacobin. I almost feel like Theresa May. It's like, remember that Jack Nicholson movie About Schmidt? It's a really good movie. It's and he basically one of the motifs of the movie is he does one of those like things where he like adopts a child, and one of the things they recommend is you write a letter. And so his letters to I forget what country it is, somewhere I think in Western Africa, but the kid name's Ndungu. And so he just basically because he's had basically no internal life and, doesn't have any real friendships or anything. So he basically just he explains his wife's affair. He writes these incredibly personal. So I just have this version of Theresa May, corresponding, that's her outlet. All right, folks. Griscom, talk about them becoming patrons.
Yeah, you guys should definitely join up on a TMBS at patreon.com/TMBS. You know, we're continuing to grow. We're actually getting very close to that 2,000 mark, which is very exciting. You know, and the thing about our Patreon community is it's not just about the content that we're providing, it's about the community within that. Like, we have the Discord, which is always humming with folks. A lot of interesting things are happening inside of the Patreon community, but each week we come out with new information from the diverse history of the left. We come in with theory readings, theory videos. We have illicit histories. There's a lot out there. I mean, we have hours and hours and hours of bonus content that you're missing out if you're just listening to the show. Plus, we always have the post game, which is definitely a lot of fun. We hang out, have some beers, take your calls and IMs. It's definitely something you want to join in.
Yeah, it's time. And, you know, the next goal obviously is 2,000. It's going to help sustain some things. Maybe even, you know, not too much more, because we already do, frankly, quite a bit. But, you know, might allow us to add a few more things to the docket. And it's great. We're accountable to you. And we're excited about it. And we want to build out this real global leftist education, solidarity, and entertainment. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Become a patron now. Tell your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to really need to figure this out. It's insane that we have not been monetized yet. So there's a link in all of the videos to a PayPal. You can go give just a one-off donation to help us sustain our costs, because right now it's a loss leader. Of course, first and foremost, become a patron. That's the best way to do things. And we want to be in the YouTube mix for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of people doing great work on YouTube, but YouTube is like, there should be 100 more people doing
We want to try to
left.
bully the fascists off of this website.
That's
basically.
right. That is the goal. And so if you can, make that one-off donation. The live show is super close. And the ticket sales are starting to pick up again. There's definitely still some left. Not a lot, but some. Go get your tickets and see all of us, the whole crew, plus Mike Racine, Trevor Beaulieu, Alona Minkowski, Bhaskar Sunkara, pre-recorded sketches. It's going to be an incredibly fun show, and we look forward to saying hi to all of you. So go to Bell House, get your tickets to the Michael Brooks Show today. Bring a friend. We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be right back. We recorded this about 2 hours ago. Conversation with the great Anna Kasparian, executive producer and host of the Young Turks. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is the great Anna Kasparian. She is a host and executive producer for the Young Turks Network. Anna, thanks a million for doing this. How are you?
I'm good. I love being on your show, so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Of course, we love having you. So I know at some point in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm sure we'll make fun of Dave Rubin at some point. I know people are anxious about that, so I just want to promise it's going to happen. Don't worry. I've got my Puma hoodie on. I'm relaxed. I'm ready to make fun of that guy. But first, I want to get Anna's opinion on something more important, and that is basically how AOC is doing, because I think she's crushing it, and I think all of the drama she's creating and all of the whining, and particularly this Politico piece, exasperated Democrats try to rein in Ocasio-Cortez, is like proof of concept of how she's handling Congress.
I think the job she's doing right now is better than even I could have predicted or expected. You know, there's always this fear that someone would run on a hyper-progressive platform, and then as soon as they get elected and as soon as they get a little taste of what it's like to be in Congress, they might change course even a little bit. And what I love is that she hasn't changed course at all. If anything, she's become a lot more aggressive in holding the Democratic Party accountable. I love the fact that she keeps getting attacked by the left and the right. And the way she handles those attacks is pretty incredible, because rather than letting it get under her skin, rather than getting angry about it and kind of lashing out, she handles it with a sense of humor that I think leads to more people liking her and being more open to what her ideas are. So she's not only crushing it when it comes to the policy front, she's crushing it when it comes to fighting back against the critics.
100%. And the other thing too that's interesting to me is I feel like she's also like, I think especially people like us, you know, like anybody probably from like mid 30s to like late 20s, but like if you got any whiff of like whether it was Obama when he was first elected, and that definitely meant a lot for a lot of different reasons, and also like that optimism like people had around like the Arab uprisings in 2011, like, you know, these technologies are so amazing, they democratize politics, blah blah blah, and then we know that actually they really don't. And in fact, like if anything, we could correlate Facebook with a global rise of fascism. And these platforms lead to a lot of like useless arguments and a lot of actually much more pernicious things. But what I find fascinating is like she's actually bringing some of that back, like not in the same like diluted way it was before, but she's actually showing you, like you said, this is actually how somebody with actual institutional power can use the democracy of social media to engage and accumulate like even more capital.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think technology is like anything else. It's a mixed bag. It could be used as a weapon, or it could be used as a tool where you directly communicate with your constituents and with voters and make sure that they're aware of the inner workings of Congress, you know, what's really going on. And I think that politicians, particularly, you know, Lieberman, who went after AOC just last week, see that as a giant threat. Right. And I'm so amused by it. You know, I've read quotes from the Democratic Party arguing that, you know, she really needs to make a decision about whether or not she wants to govern or be a Twitter star. And so they minimize the very positive impact of her social media engagement with her constituents, with American voters. And I love that they're threatened by that. I love the fact that they hate how influential she is. And what's also really incredible is her, let's say, the fact that she pushes for an increase in the top marginal tax rate. I mean, that's not something that you would ever expect anyone on the right to be in favor of. But after she made that point on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, all of a sudden you see Tucker Carlson. I mean, I don't trust him, but he goes on his show, goes on this long monologue about corporate greed.
Right.
Then you see people like Ann Coulter supporting a wealth tax in reference to what AOC said during that interview. And, you know, I don't agree with those people at all when it comes to pretty much everything else. But the fact that she managed to get that talking point front and center in the American public's consciousness, and the fact that now you have people really discussing, you know, the possibility of doing something like that is incredible. And she's so likable. I think that it's ridiculous that needs to be an important part of a politician, but it is an important part because if Americans can relate to her and they can trust her, then they're much more open to considering her proposals and ideas.
100%. And I also think like what's interesting to me is like I think particularly Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter are basically like they're playing the authoritarian right-wing populist game. And part of that means like, you know, I mean, you know, right, like exploiting some legitimate grievances and then like off-ramping it into xenophobia as an example. But what's interesting is like, especially Tucker, and I don't know as much about Ann Coulter because fuck Ann Coulter, but Tucker like never, you know, and so all those segments, like we played one the other day where he's like complaining about capitalism actually, but then all of a sudden it becomes about like, you know, kids are smoking too much weed and they look vacant or whatever the hell he's talking about. And when she does that though, it's like, well, here's some actual teeth. Like instead of just pivoting to the racism, like here's an actual proposal which Trump's never going to support, no Republicans are going to ever support because they're an oligarch party. Most Democrats won't support it. But those are some like actual markers. And the same way that like Bernie Sanders did that for Medicare for all, she's doing that with just like marginal tax rates, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just quickly touching on Tucker's monologue about corporate greed. I mean, he comes at it from a very different perspective than I would. I mean, his whole spiel is about the importance of maintaining the nuclear American family.
Right.
He's very much concerned about how, there's a ton of single mothers in the United States, and he thinks that it's directly caused by corporate greed, the fact that manufacturing jobs have been, exported to other countries. And since these men are losing manufacturing jobs, women are less likely to marry them, and that's leading to all sorts of social grief here in the United States. I mean, yes, I'm sure that there's some value to that argument, but really the heart of the issue here is that we can't pay our bills. Right. Like, we're not able to provide for our families, that our wages have remained stagnant, and we need to do something to mitigate that, to solve that problem. And so I think that he's genuine in seeing this as an issue. And yes, I do think he's pandering in this populist way, kind of similar to what Trump did. But I do think that he's genuine in being concerned about how low wages and a lack of jobs is negatively impacting Americans throughout the country.
Do you think, I want to pivot a little bit. I'm not sure if we'll have a disagreement on this or not, because I am curious how you see it. My cards are on the table. I'm very skeptical about Tulsi Gabbard, right? I think it's cool that she endorsed Bernie Sanders. I think like whether we're talking about, Obama or AOC, although I certainly wouldn't put her in that category of either of those two in terms of charisma, to be blunt. But it's like, I understand, like, of course, she has like a different background. She's younger. She's telegenic. She seems like, she's cool in a certain way. Like, I get all of the things that people are drawn to about her, but I also find, I'll get to that in a second. Before I get to, let me stop. What do you think about Tulsi Gabbard? Where would you put her in the 2020 race, and what's your kind of like instincts about her out of the gate?
Okay, so before I get to what my current thoughts are, let me just back up and talk a little bit about some coverage that we had yesterday on the Young Turks show in regard to Gabbard.
Okay.
So a bunch of mainstream media outlets have been attacking her over her previous statements about gay marriage and about the gay community in general. And so when she was between the ages of like 19 and 22, she said some pretty hideous things about gay people. She referred to them as extremists, and I obviously don't agree with any of those statements, but since then, it appears that she's evolved on that issue, with the exception of an interview that she had with Ozzy back in 2016. And in that interview, she basically said, like, look, I still have the same beliefs in regard to the gay community, but I'm not going to force my morals on the American people. I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially what she said. To me, that was a little bit of a red flag, and I wish I had seen that comment prior to us airing that segment. But look, aside from the issues pertaining to like the gay community, there's a lot of other problems that I see. And to be quite honest with you, after I heard her, podcast with Joe Rogan, I don't know if you listened to it, there were a number of red flags that made me super uneasy. Yeah, so you should listen to it because when she starts talking about Syria, there's some stuff in there that it just made me uneasy. And so I wanted to give myself a chance to really like dig in and figure out what I really feel about her, what I think about her. And then I came across a speech that she gave back in 2015 in Washington, D.C. for an organization known as Christians United for Israel.
Right.
It's obviously, I mean, you can guess by the name, it's a very pro-Israel organization, which on its face isn't a bad thing, but then you dig deep into the organization, you find out that, they were lobbying pretty hard to get Trump to name Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And in her speech, there was a lot of pro-war lingo going on. So, for instance, she specifically advocated for arming Kurds in Iraq with anti-tank missiles to fight ISIS. She was a little critical about the Iran nuclear deal. Now, later she came out and criticized Trump for, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. But all of these talking points that she shared in that speech, I think are problematic when it comes to my progressive ideals with foreign policy.
Totally. And I'm going to add a few more to that, but I also just want to say, particularly with like gay rights, right? The thing that is
Mm-hmm.
first of all, I think the other thing to put on the table is my understanding is at some point she also had supported gay conversion therapy, which to me is like
She did.
as far as I understand, and I'll be the first one to admit that there's a lot more that I would need to learn, but it strikes me that like, you know, as an example, we know, and plenty of people point out that like Bill Clinton, or, you know, obviously Bill Clinton, but Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and plenty of people were not on the right side of, you know, marriage equality until it became pretty politically safe to be. But that being said, you know, these people did not support gay conversion therapy, and that is a whole other order of magnitude. You know, in addition to having the wrong position on a key civil rights issue, that's like, you know, basically empowering like child abuse. So that's a really, really, really big red flag. But the other thing that I find very weird about this is I think like, look, yeah, I think I'm generally, I actually do support some arming of Kurds in Syria, but in general, of course, I oppose U.S. action in Syria. I don't think, though, that you need to be so credulous about Assad, which she is. And I also think that in addition to like the far right connections with India and Israel, you have this very weird two-step where you have some people who were relentlessly critical of the Obama drone program, as you should be. And all of a sudden, with her, it's cool. And now, you know, there's a comment we're going to play in the next segment where in 2014, I believe, she expresses just ambiguity about torture. And so it's both that these are serious red flags, and also that, look, I make no bones about it. I like Bernie. I hope he runs. If he runs, I'm going to support him 100%. But I don't think anybody should relate to any of these people in a cult-like way. And the support that I see forming around her from people who, you know, I actually honestly like people who are like, hey, I want people to have health care, but I'm also super pro-Israel and love drones. I would be like, well, you should look at Tulsi Gabbard. She's a pretty enticing candidate. But a lot of people who are like going on about how, you know, this isn't the real left and blah, 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 all of a sudden they're ready to prevaricate for her. And I think that's very weird.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, following 2016's election, I'm very hesitant to jump on any bandwagon, which is why I'm super careful in who I endorse. I don't know who I'm going to support yet. I want to wait and see what the policy proposals are. I want to see what the Democratic primary debates are going to be like. I want to see, you know, if Tulsi Gabbard, if she ends up being a real contender, how she's going to answer to some of these very real questions about her views on gay marriage, the gay community, torture, intervention. I do not, for the most part, support military intervention. For me, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the U.S. government arming anyone abroad has ever really helped us later. So I again want to see like her reasoning for wanting to arm the Kurds in Iraq, not in Syria. She was specifically talking about Iraq, and whether she still agrees with that and if she thinks it would be beneficial for our own national security interests. But either way, from what I've been researching recently, I've noticed that she presents herself in one way in front of one crowd and then changes course when she's in front of a different crowd. That's the way that I've seen it. And I need to really research more to confirm it. And I need to know what she really believes today, because I do believe that people can evolve. You know, when I was in high school, because I was raised in a very conservative household, you know, I believed that gay marriage was wrong. But by the time I was in college, I'm like, screw that. Like, what is this BS? Like, I don't care. Why am I getting involved in the personal lives of other Americans? Like, let them do what they want to do. If they love each other, it is what it is. But I never once supported gay conversion therapy. I've never once referred to anyone in the gay community as an extremist simply because they're gay. So I agree with you in that, you know, her strong language did differ considerably from Obama, who was just honestly a weak politician and never really wanted to take a strong stance until it was politically popular to do so.
Right. And I think, like, look, I think in general, across the board, especially in times of change, like, I think the left generally needs to be way more on the other end of, like, people change, people evolve, people, like, we're all getting work done, right? Like we're all like
Mm-hmm.
the Bodega Boys, Jesus and Mero, they say God's working on all of us and whatever. Like don't get too literal about. I know some people are like, I don't believe in God, but obviously that's not really the point of that comment, right? Like everybody's like we're all hopefully evolving and improving, and we've all changed hopefully every aspect of ourselves as we work on ourselves and our communities, right? So I'm not saying this to like it's not my perspective to be like, well, she did X, X, and X, so forget her, right? But it's more to be like,
Right.
I'm not really sure how genuine some of these pivots are. And actually, there's a whole slew of other areas where she actually hasn't exactly said X, X, and X. She's been pretty consistent about El-Sisi in Egypt, about Assad in Syria, about far-right forces in India, as well as drones and so on. So, you got to be real about what you're dealing with here. And I just feel like some people aren't being real. I think if you came at me with your argument for why you support El-Sisi and drones, okay, cool, we could have it out. But don't come to me with some shit about some great pacifist cause when that's the actual record, not to mention the torture stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to every single candidate, it's important to have a healthy dose of skepticism and to really fact check each candidate when they say something and claim that they support one policy proposal over the other. I don't believe in looking at a politician and automatically considering that person a god, and I think that there was a lot of that in the last election. I'd like to avoid that moving forward. And so I'm going to reserve judgment until I have all the facts. But I do agree with you that there are some, past positions that Tulsi Gabbard held, some current positions that she appears to hold that are problematic. And I think the progressives should just be fully aware of those positions and then make an informed, decision as to who they want to support in the primaries.
No doubt. I got to let you go in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to say when you said you were thinking about people's policies and records, and I was picturing you doing like very diligent research and thinking about it, and then this dumb voice went off in my head, and I was just like, I'm just really interested in your ideas.
Well, I mean, I'm really hoping that he's looked into Bolsonaro and made a decision about whether or not he supports him. I mean, that video was pretty incredible. I love that you tweeted it.
Isn't that fucking unreal? And then what I liked is that in that video, we played it last week on the show, so most people know what I'm talking about. But basically, but please watch. Anna did an incredible video, just demolishing Dave Rubin, and also, by the way, doing a great explanation of the Lula case and everything that's been happening in Brazil. Please go watch that. But he appeared on a pro-Bolsonaro propaganda YouTube channel, and then he got a question about it from his audience, and it was specifically with regards to clear-cutting the Amazon. And he was like, and I knew, and it was funny because I figured like, oh, he'll get a question like that, and he'll be like, I don't know, I need to read more. But he did like, SJWs in the schools, blah, blah, blah. But he did use the like, I don't know enough about clear cutting in the Amazon. And I saw today though that he was bitching on Twitter about like, I don't know, Family Guy isn't going to do gay jokes anymore. Some shit that like, honestly, I wouldn't even know one way or another if I wasn't looking to make fun of Dave Rubin. And I saw that tweet and I was like, oh, I guess like his Amazon clear cutting reading time obviously got interrupted by the fucking breaking news that Seth MacFarlane's like cartoon that is apparently still running on television isn't going to do like 2005 gay jokes anymore. Like, way to keep your eye on the ball, buddy.
Yeah, he's a simple-minded kind of guy. That's all he is. I mean, and honestly, I'm so past being upset about him. I don't even know if I was ever really upset. I was just frustrated at how like his ridiculous talking points somehow resonate with people. Like, I just want people to be better. And I'm not saying like, hey, I don't want you to have libertarian viewpoints. Like, it's fine if we disagree. It's fine if we have different perspectives. I think that's totally okay. But don't be fooled by literally the dumbest guy in media. Right? Like, I just want people to be better. I want you to be better. I want you to listen to people who are actually informed on the topics. And look, I'm not perfect. I know that I've probably, made a few mistakes or errors. I've
Everyone
aired
has.
stories where maybe I didn't have, but there's a certain level of intellectual curiosity that I hope people see in me that I just don't think Dave Rubin will ever have. I mean, how do you go on to do propaganda for this fascist Brazilian leader, and then later when you're asked a question about him, you don't even know how to say his last name? Who the hell is Bolsonaro? Like, I couldn't believe how incredibly stupid he came off as, because that's who he is. He
It's
is
a
stupid. He has
burrito
no
place that just
intellectual
shut down on
curiosity.
Fulton. Bolsarno.
Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking when I saw that, I was like, the closest I could think of is if like I, as a socialist, just like did a North Korean propaganda video, and I was just like, yeah, like they're doing a lot for ideas and trains, and they're doing a lot with the capitalist class, so I like that. And then 2 weeks later, it's like Kim Jong-si. I don't know. I need to read more about that.
So embarrassing. And then one final thing I just wanted to
Yeah,
bring up.
please.
Look, there are hardworking Americans who are suffering over the dysfunction of our government right now.
Right.
Okay, like 800,000 federal workers who, many of them are not, getting paid much. 78% of them are literally living paycheck to paycheck. And Dave Rubin felt the need to go on Twitter and criticize them for deciding to take a government job. That was his commentary. That was his enlightened commentary on this very real issue. There are people right now who are not able to feed their children over the dysfunction of government, and he's going to go ahead and point fingers at the federal workers as if they're the problem.
Yeah,
He's
but
so pathetic.
You recognize that Family Guy is not doing gay jokes anymore, right, Anna? I mean,
You know what? That is the real problem. Thank you for bringing up the biggest idea.
I don't know. Interested in ideas. All right. So, Anna Kasparian, it's always a pleasure. We'll be talking with you again soon. Please, everybody, I'm sure you probably already are, but if you're not, be definitely watching Anna and Jank and Ben and Mike and Hassan, the crew over at TYT. Follow her on Twitter. Of course, there'll be links. Anna Kasparian, host and executive producer at the Young Turks. Anna, thanks a million.
Thank you.
Love Anna's Rubin trajectory. I love it because, I mean, one of the things that's great, I think, I think in general, like we need a little bit more kind of earnestness is good on the left and left-wing media. And I'm definitely not always the one to bring it.
To don't always take a pose of knowingness.
Exactly. So I just like she's so smart and authentic, which is awesome. And it's funny though, but I like the Rubin trajectory because I remember like last summer it was like the conversation was like, how could this guy that I was friends with and I've worked with be such an asshole? Like, and now she's just kind of like, that guy's a fucking idiot. And when someone like Anna does that, like that says more. Matt, David, myself, like, that might be a fairly quick reflex for
We're
us.
cynical irony bros.
Yeah, we're cynical. Right, exactly. So when I tell you Dave Rubin is so fucking stupid, it shocks me. It's true. It's an accurate comment. But I think when you get an Anna Kasparian there to just be like, he's a simpleton, that says quite a bit. All right, let's do... Actually, you know what, Griscom, you want to do your thing first? All right. Now, he's the chief economist, unless Richard Wolff is in studio. David Griscom with the Griscom Economic Long Time.
Well, talking about efficiency, I wanted to talk about a very efficient company that's been getting into a little bit of trouble recently. I'm talking about the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, which you might not be familiar if you don't live in California, but it is the largest utility company in the United States, serving large parts of Northern California, 16 million customers with over 70,000 square miles. Now, they just announced that they are going to be, at the end of the month, declaring bankruptcy because of they're suspected that they're going to be facing up to $30 billion in liabilities for the Camp Fire that devastated California. So I just want to talk a little bit about this company and the public.
They fucking did that?
Well, so there's an investigation now. and it hasn't come out yet, but basically they think that they're going to face liabilities. They already were found in 2017. There were also massive wildfires in California, and 17 out of 21 of those fires were found to have involvement from PG&E. Now, I just wanted to talk about this company a little bit because it's pretty incredible, right? And it's also one of these things where we talk about where the profit motive actually causes death and destruction across the country. So the company is overseen by the government, but it is run as a private company. So that means they have very well-paid CEOs, they have stockholders, and they're looking to pursue a profit. Now, of course, as we know from our good friends on the right wing,
third way dream.
Well, that
right
means
there.
that means that the company is very efficient and great. So the people of California enjoy great things, like the company in 2018 spending nearly $9 million in lobbying the government. California Public Utilities Commission permits PG&E to charge rates. The rates that people who get their electricity and gas through PG&E are 30% higher than the national average. Meanwhile, over the past decade, PG&E shareholders enjoyed 11.35% yearly return on equity over the past decade. So people are getting paid and making money. Remember, they also enjoy a captive consumer market of 16 million customers in northern and central California. Now, if PG&E were publicly owned, there would be no need to cut profits off the top and to search for workarounds of regulation and to pursue lobbying. Now, let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So we see these fires that happened in Northern California. These are caused by failing gas lines, old, decrepit gas lines. And because the company can only raise rates after they get permission from the government, they've been asking to raise the rates nearly every year to pay to fix these pipes. So in 2010, there was a deadly explosion in San Bruno. It killed 8 people, injured very severely 50 others, and destroyed over 100 homes. Now, this is just a warning shot for what we're about to talk about happen later. But before the explosion, the complaints have been made because of smelling of gas and that this is an old decrepit pipeline and needs to go. PG&E knew this. As far back as 2007, internal documents showed that the company knew that they needed to replace the line nearby. They even got approval for a rate increase, specifically citing the need to replace the line in San Bruno. Well, what did they do with that money? They paid their shareholders and they increased the bonuses for the CEO of the corporation.
Innovation, motherfucker.
Putting off the very necessarily needed repairs. Now, since then, the lower cost of maintenance has led to higher profits, and people have enjoyed very, very nice dividends over the past year of people who are invested in the company. Now, the Camp Fire, which devastated California. Let's remember even in Brooklyn, we had a hazy evening one day where the smoke from the fire came all the way across the continental United States and covered Brooklyn in a smoky haze.
It's fucking wild.
15 minutes before the first fire was reported, PG&E reported that there had been an electrical incident and that they had lost contact with one of these lines. So this company very likely is going to be found, to have very serious negligence, in these fires. And this is the kind of efficiency that you get from a company like PG&E, who in 2016, through their own findings, revealed that the cost of natural gas had gone down 36%, but raised rates for the customers to pay for these repairs, which were never done. And the money that they raised, over $2.7 billion between 2014 and 2016, due to the rate increases, that could have paid for an entire new system in all of the areas where their pipelines erupted or were involved in the fires in California, could have paid for them, over and over.
Yeah, but if you don't put out money, then you can't attract the best talent, and then and then bad things happen. If you don't have the best people in charge, then the company makes foolish errors, and people get hurt.
But I just want to say this real quick, because right now we're looking at a company that services a lot of people, and they're going to be they already are asking for a potential bailout for the people of California.
Of course they are.
What the people of California need to say very clearly is that we're done with this market efficiency, that we're done with this kind of oversight, and that this system needs to be taken back into the hands of the people, because the people can't afford the rate increases, and they most certainly cannot deal with the fires and the devastation caused by the free market for-profit system. That is something that belongs for the people, and they should seize it.
I love that. Look at Grisco with his fucking
I'm pissed,
Ho Chi
man.
Minh LBJ.
Fucking,
you should be
disgusting.
pissed. You should. All right, you know what?
When I was seeing
before I do a bit, You go off more, King. Because
No, I'm just saying
that's just what I was saying. We need more authentic
When I was
energy.
researching this a little bit, I was losing my mind because I saw that they were potentially asking for a bailout, and you saw how negligent they were. And then when they started going through their documents and getting more into their, what they knew that all this stuff was going on, and they were avoiding it because they wanted to pay their shareholders more, because they wanted to have, they're talking about pay packages around $9 million for their top executives.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right? This money could all be going to take care of the people, and natural gas has been going down, the cost of natural gas has been going down across the country for a long time now, and they continue to raise rates to fix these lines, and they don't even fucking do it, and people die, and then we're supposed to pick up the pieces for them. It's so fucking ridiculous.
Disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting, and it's structural.
Would start kicking in.
Well, how do you answer that?
I mean,
fucking august thinker Dave Rubin.
Competition starts kicking in until people start dying in fires.
Right.
What are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please.
I've seen you know, but that was very, very, very Texas Ho Chi Minh right there. She's like, I'll tell you our counteroffer. We take back the whole goddamn company for the people, sir. You roll up your sleeves.
Is that a Hank Hill?
Yeah.
Propane.
Propane's for the people. You didn't invent propane. You didn't invent that. It's a goddamn natural resource. Did Seth MacFarlane do that show too? Oh no, that was Mike Judge. Mike Judge. I never watched. I think Seth MacFarlane. I like the Ted movies, but I never watched Family Guy.
Really?
Oh, I love the Ted.
That's a funny thing to see. I feel
Ted
like Family
movies are
Guy's
fucking
huge. The Ted movies, those are the
fucking hilarious.
It was weird. Like
the Ted movies were funny.
I haven't seen the Ted movies either, but
Ted
they
movies
seem to
are
be
great.
really huge for like a couple months. Like the biggest thing in the world.
Were they?
Yeah, no, they.
I
each had their
saw that.
moment.
I was like, I can't handle that. I think the funnier thing that
What?
Seth MacFarlane is doing is that he's now. Have you seen this new sitcom that he's doing where it's
No.
it's
Orville
it's
or something
Star
like
Trek?
that? Yeah.
and he gets to be the captain.
The commercials are kind of funny. Yeah.
It's pretty funny. It's
No,
like,
I
this
don't-
guy's
I'm
like a
not mad
super
at
nerd.
Seth
No, it's great.
MacFarlane.
And he's leveraged his position and his fame into like living out his childhood dream. of
That's
being
what I
like
like
doing the Glenn
about
Beck
He's
special.
managed to do that. That's why Ted is so funny. Is it's sort of like that, but it's a mashup. I don't know. And there's like this one part where the teddy bear is getting kidnapped by this like crazy stalker guy, and he's just like, Ted, and they're like, it's like the whole thing. It's so hilariously overdone. Like it's like literally like at Fenway, and he's trying to like climb over, and the guy's like pulling his leg, and he's a stuffed animal, so it's really dangerous, right? And the guy's like, Teddy, I need you to be with me because we're meant to be together or something. And the teddy bear looks down. And he's just like, we're very far apart on this. It's so fucking stupid. I love it.
Like if that Orville show is basically just a vanity project that helps him realize some desires he had as a kid, maybe we can save this for the post game. But what would your TV show be if you reached the type of success where you could get a show greenlit and you could be the star?
It's an amazing idea. Post game. All right, perfect. Okay, let's do a global update. We're going to start with this. This is making the rounds. Look, I make no bones about it. I mean, part of the reason that I'm focusing on Tulsi Gabbard right now is because she's relevant in the ecosystem we're in. There's a lot of people who've gotten interested in her for some, as I say, reasons that make a lot of sense. It's awesome she endorsed Bernie Sanders. It's great that she signed on to Medicare for All. It's great that she voted against PAYGO. But there's exceedingly serious questions and red flags here, and I hope people be real about it. And I would also say, look, the Obama administration should absolutely have prosecuted people, or at the very least had a broad Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the torture program. First and foremost, prosecuted the architects of it, without a doubt. Because that's why we're in a situation where Trump can be pro-torture, while torture could actually still continue, in some cases under Obama, through subcontracting to other countries. This is basic foundational stuff. And Tulsi Gabbard's response on this is a major problem. It's also the same kind of vacuous nonsense that you've heard from Sam Harris, by the way. Here's Tulsi Gabbard, this was a couple of years ago on Indian broadcast television, getting questioned about the torture report. I just want you to take this in.
Let me ask you in the end, as a soldier, how do you respond to the much discussed report on the CIA's use of torture and what some Americans have called a blot on American values? Do you share that opinion, or as a soldier, do you have a very different perspective on the use of torture?
Very bluntly, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted on this report. There are, I think the jury is still out on the report itself. There have been comments that there are things missing or it was incomplete, and there are differing opinions on the report itself. But as I think about it myself, clearly we would not like to see any human, any person around the world being treated inhumanely. On the other side, I can also understand that any of us, if we're in a situation where our family or our community, our state or our country is in a place where, let's say in an hour, a nuclear bomb or an attack will go off unless this information is found. I believe that if I were the president of the United States, that I would do everything in my power to keep the American people safe. So this is an area that I have conflicting feelings on.
Although, of course, there are questions about whether torture actually leads to the correct intel, right?
Yeah.
That debate carries on.
And that debate carries on. There are those who are in the position of conducting these interrogations, some who have said
it does work.
It does, and others who have said it doesn't.
So there's a good signal, by the way, and I'll go second order. My fundamental commitment is that torture is a first order thing, which is both morally and legally we need to not do it. Maybe it will come up in the magical scenario she's talking about and Sam Harris talks about that never exists in the real world.
And in which case, let's just deal with that. Like,
sure.
Then let's say I'm Jack Bauer.
You're Jack Bauer,
and I know torture's
hint on your TV show choice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. I'm a counterterrorism official.
Nice.
And I would, if 100% I knew I could just torture this guy and get this information, I would torture him, and then I'd take the punishment to reify the idea that, yes, torture is bad, and I knew it was bad, and I accept this punishment, but I was doing it to save people, and then you talk about pardons and stuff like that.
And we would petition for a pardon.
Exactly.
Because in this literal 1 in a trillion scenario, that would be the right thing to do. In the same way that you could probably find, like, I don't know, sometimes people get killed in self-defense as an example, but we don't want to explicitly make that legal, right? So the other two things to bear in mind in this, okay, first of all, with this magical exception that never exists in real-world scenarios, barely ever, and certainly not in the way they're talking about, we've dealt with that. Then there's actually a very broad-based principle and look, law is socially constructed. Law is essentially usually the codifying of pre-existing power arrangements. I am a very, a lot of smart people have made critiques like that. I understand that. But there's also positive reasons that we establish certain case law. And bare minimums like getting rid of torture has actually been a pretty significant advancement in some respects. And the fact that the Bush administration destroyed that is one of among many serious atrocities in their legacy. So, and then, as far as the efficacy, it's a pretty good signal. I mean, first of all, there was no dispute about that report. That report just outlined what the program was. Waterboarding, rectal feeding, okay? Disgusting, systemic abuse overseen globally by the CIA and by the defense, people involved in defense. Okay, so there's no dispute. That was what it was. The only people who've come forward and said this program worked were people like Tony Rodriguez, an incredibly ethically suspect former CIA operative who got his start backing dictatorships in Latin America. He said it worked. Okay? It's a good, and almost no one else did. No other political officials. FBI officials, in fact, argued vigorously against it. So it's a pretty good indication if only a handful of people say it worked, and those are people who are directly implicated in these atrocities, and everybody else questions it or outright disputes it, that should say a hell of a lot. Matt, go ahead.
This is I know I give a lot of book
No,
recommendations, but this is 100% lock. You will not regret investing time in this book. Guantanamo Diary by Mohamedou Ould Salah. He actually written by him, and I think maybe foyed out, or I'm not sure exactly how it got out. And then since he's been released, they released a fully restored version, which is interesting because the original copy that I have has a lot of stuff blocked out.
A lot of redactions?
Yeah, redactions.
Yeah.
So, but this book is incredible. He's an amazing writer and the way he expresses himself. But like the situation, I mean, it's a complete, I don't know how to put it. Like what Solzhenitsyn warns about in Gulag Archipelago.
Oh,
like,
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah, like it's
Torture,
like, Guantanamo was just such an offense to humanity that it's depressing that it's almost forgotten about now. We don't really talk about that much, except when Obama was in office.
Absolutely. And again, like you said this off air, and it's true. I mean, look, and again, criticize Obama. And I find it very bizarre that a lot of people who correctly criticized Obama for a variety of policies are willing to excuse those same policies like drones when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard as bizarre cult-like behavior. But in addition to that, this is a policy that at least on paper, at least as far as rhetorical commitment, every single other mainline Democrat that I'm aware of has expressed no ambiguity about this policy, right? So what they will do in office, absolutely, there's open questions about the seriousness of commitment of these other officials, but no one has expressed this ambiguity. Not Bernie Sanders, not Kamala Harris, not Joe Biden, not Kristen Gillibrand, not Cory Booker, not Julian Castro, like not Elizabeth Warren. There is not a single candidate along the whole spectrum of the Democratic Party that has expressed any ambiguity about the Bush torture program. So that should say a hell of a lot. And this was the thing that Matt said, if Joe Biden said this, or there was video of Joe Biden saying this would be a feeding frenzy amongst everybody for a couple of days, and rightfully so. So, that to me, it's quite simple.
Yeah, I mean, this, and this, all the stuff that we're seeing about Tulsi that's been coming out, I think is very important to understand that there's like a distinction, because so much of the mainstream, like Democratic Party is so one line on our history of torture and on war. Right. That, sometimes somebody speaking out or speaking a little bit differently can make them seem like they're radical or like a particular anti-war.
Right. No doubt.
And it's something that, we need to be careful of, that just, breaking from the line of the Democratic Party does not mean that you're breaking in a progressive or left way.
Precisely. That's the key point. That's the point we're always trying to make on this show. Exactly. Okay, a few more things to get to in this global update. I want to talk, we've talked a lot about the need to not abandon the Kurdish, the Syrian Kurds. I stand by that position 100%. It's a question of global solidarity. It's a question of the only sort of force there that has protected, in some ways, very significant, very positive political experiment. Please, if you haven't yet, watch Djene Bajlan's and I's conversation on the Kurdish Syrian forces, and please don't buy into recycled, frankly, Erdogan government propaganda on that. And I want to also highlight a whole other equation here that's connected, although distinct, more, frankly, on the social democratic side. There's a political party in Turkey called the HDP. We did an illicit history of them in the early episodes for patrons of the show, Djene Bajlan and I. HDP is a democratic, Kurdish-oriented party, but they had the brilliant move of expanding their base a couple years ago. And so they gradually sort of moved in a direction where they were, of course, promoting and protecting Kurdish rights, which are steadily abused in Turkey, but incorporated a broad campaign for social democracy, which included ecology, expanding the social safety net, women's rights. I mean, really, essentially a modern social democratic formation in Turkey. And they surprised everybody. And I'm going to quote now from Djene Bajlan, and I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago in Jacobin about this. But after the HDP's surprising finish in the June of 2015 election, which helped deny Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, AKP, a parliamentary democracy, the first time since 2002, Erdogan began to take an increasingly hard line to shore up support amongst Turkish nationalists who were never comfortable with the peace process. Erdogan had previously launched a peace process. Now, at the same time, and overlapping with Turkish forces going into Afrin and committing ethnic cleansing, which is absolutely what would happen in Rojava, they started imprisoning HDP leaders who, again, like, these are not PKK. They're not guerrilla fighters. These are lawyers who are running social democratic campaigns more analogous, frankly, to the UK Labour Party than anything else. I mean, really, another incredibly distinct contribution to Middle Eastern politics, something that did not fall under the guise of either religious fundamentalism and Islamic conservatism or secular dictatorships. And Salatan Demirtas, who's the leader of HDP, has been imprisoned for a couple of years now under Erdogan. And basically, you know, the European court has questioned this, and the Turks have completely ignored it. It's on just fallacious, nonsensical charges of incitement and connections to terrorism. So it underlines the full formation and blossoming, of course, of Erdogan as the grotesque authoritarian that he is. And it also is important to highlight, in this case, in fact, another Kurdish-led formation that actually provides a different political blueprint for the Middle East. And is, you know, it's funny, they're certainly social democratic. As Steve Cook said to me from the Council on Foreign Relations, he said, look, in the last election, if you were a liberal Turk, you voted HDP. That was the choice if you were not rewarding nationalism or religious fundamentalism. Okay, so we must have that solidarity as well. There's a ceasefire that has been holding in Yemen. Negotiations are continuing. We need to keep an eye on this. There's been some real progress made with Bernie Sanders and Chris Murphy and Mike Lee in the Senate, and Ro Khanna leading the way in the House on stopping U.S. support for this horrific Saudi Emirati bombardment, which has killed tens of thousands and caused all sorts of humanitarian crises going back to 2015 in Yemen. Quoting now briefly from Al Jazeera, the Houthis are the Shia rebel movement that the Saudis are targeting. Although a ceasefire in Hudaydah has largely struck, each side has accused the other of violating the truce. A near daily missile fire and automatic gunfire can be heard by the thousands of civilians who still reside in the city. Elsewhere in Yemen, the Iran-aligned Houthis, now they were not necessarily Iran-aligned actually before the Saudi bombardment, but we'll get into that another time. Houthis threatened to continue ongoing drone attacks after a deadly strike last week on a Yemeni military parade, stoking tensions between warring parties amid shaky UN peace efforts. So I just need us to, keep that at the forefront as well. That is one of the main crimes in the world today, and the United States and the United Kingdom are active co-participants in that, and we need to push forward in ending those atrocities. Of course, something that the Trump administration and Mike Pompeo have resisted every step of the way. All right, folks. This Sunday, David Adler, he is a senior advisor, speechwriter, collaborator with Yanis Varoufakis. He also did the research that showed that centrists were the ones who are most skeptical of democracy. We're going to be doing illicit history that fuses that.
Not populists?
Not populists. Shocking research. Yasha Monk does not like. We're going to talk about that, as well as this emerging left formation in the Eurozone, and get up to speed on the left project in Europe and the forces for democracy there. If you haven't yet, a conversation with Ava Gollinger on Chavez, on Venezuela, but also touching on Assad and Putin and Gaddafi. It was fascinating, great illicit history. Her book, Confidant of Quote-Unquote Tyrants, is, of course, available. Become a patron today. It's time to do it. Patreon.com/TMBS, 2-to-1 extra content. We have a jam-packed post-game, including a lot of dunking ahead for you. And get your tickets to the Bell House. And there might be a whole other thing to announce along similar lines soon. just to let you know. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you to each and every one of you. Peace and love. Left is best.